Good morning. I want you to do something for me. Would you close your eyes? Just right now, close your eyes and just give me a second. Okay, so in that, let me just ask you, how many of you are like uncomfortable with that? Like some of you, your stress levels went up because there was a quietness, a stillness around you that you're like, what's happening? Like what's about to happen? And there was some kind of anxiety that welled up in you simply because things got quiet. Anybody? Come on. Yeah, see, some of you are like, understand, we are the most stressed out generation of all time. Do you realize that 55% of Americans are unable to enjoy life because of their level of stress? 59% of Americans say this past year has been the most stressful year of their entire life. 61% of Americans are stressed out about personal finance. 57% of American workers are stressed out about their pay. 80% of Americans are stressed out about costs of living. 73% stressed out about inflation. Like, we are uptight, we are stressed out, we are unhappy, and so often we look at one another thinking, I've got to act like I have it together, like I've got to demonstrate that I'm strong and I'm able, and all these things that we muddle together thinking that maybe, just maybe, my outside veneer will make people think I have peace. And I think one of the reasons why it makes Jesus' words come to light. When Jesus said, I've come to give you stress and stress abundantly. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, I've come to give you life and life abundantly. And some of you would say, but PK, that's the problem. Life is what stresses me. And I have a lot of it. And it keeps coming at me. And it's a whirlwind. And everything about life is what's making me stressed out. And some of you are like, PK, your tone right now is stressing me out. Like just the way you're talking, it's stressing me out. And I get it. What are you supposed to do when life only brings stress and there seems to be no sense of peace whatsoever? Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't come at this from a spiritual vantage point that I recognize even in counseling that when there's a problem in someone's life, there's a need for something to change. And when you and I find ourselves in places, in this world, in this way we live, in the thing we called life, something has to change in both our mind and in our heart. And in our culture, recognize the world would say the answer to your anxiety, the answer to your stress, the answer to your worry is a pill. Now hear me. I'm not saying there's something wrong with a pill. I'm saying there's something wrong with a pill when the pill you expect to replace the words of God. Now here, if you're taking something to address the worry and anxiety in your life and you have negated the words of God, then the pill becomes your God. And in the moment when we recognize what really changes the way we think, the way we feel, the way we live, comes from the words of God, which is why this book is so important when it says the Word of God is alive and active. And so when I think about this moment, when opening up the Word, I approach it with the idea that I read it in order to do, well, what James talks about. Like a man looking into a mirror and walking away forgetting what he has seen, or recognizing the Word is meant to be a reflection of the King toward I, for me to be a more reflection of Him, and it begins to change some things in me. So the words of God begin to permeate the way I live, the way I think. And God says, I have an answer to your worry. I have an answer. And what does He say the answer to these pressures? What does He say the answers to this stress is? He says His peace. This morning, if you have your Bible, I invite you to look with me at a verse out of the book of John in chapter 14, a chapter chocked full of what peace looks like with the presence of the Holy Spirit and the gift that Jesus came to bring. And in the midst of chapter 14, I want you to see so clearly that Jesus says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. How many of you get stressed out when you're around people who demonstrate calm? Like how many of you get stressed out when you're around somebody that seems to be at rest? See, Jesus, when you go back and look at his testimony and you see the story that just comes to life through the New Testament, you begin to realize that Jesus, when looking at his life, looking at his ministry in those 3.5 years, recognized Jesus understanding what the story would look like. Jesus understanding how the story would end, didn't go around wringing his hands like, oh, the Pharisees are going to crucify me. Oh, the people are going to reject me. Oh, these 12 knuckleheads, I've only got 3 years to get them in line. And oh, me, oh, my. Like Jesus walks and talks and lives in this peace that looks perfect. And Jesus is saying, listen, this peace that I have, I offer it to you. I've come to give it to you. My peace I give to you. And notice as you read that what it is. Jesus is saying it's a gift. You can't do anything to earn it. You don't have a merit toward it. You can't buy it. Like there's nothing you have that's going to give you a right to it. No, Jesus says all you have to do is receive it. It's offered to you, and the peace that Jesus, well, he offers. I think the New Testament shows us that there are 3 different kinds of peace that he offers. And some of you today may have some kind of generic idea of peace. You might think it's quiet. And quiet might have something to do with peace, but Jesus is saying it's a lot more than just a quiet house. Even in the quietness of some of your homes, you still can't rest. And so the first peace I believe Jesus came to give us is number 1, spiritual peace with God. Spiritual peace with God. Have you ever heard someone ask the question for someone who's terminally ill or maybe in their last few moments on a deathbed? And they'll ask a question that sounds something like this. Have you made peace with God? Now, understanding how well-intentioned that question is, I want you to understand how misleading it is. Understand, when peace is made between 2 parties, it means that something has been conceded. Concessions have been made. Both parties give something that the other party desires in order for there to be an acceptance of that peace. Let me be clear. You and I have nothing to offer the King in order for you and I to receive peace. There is nothing you bring to the table. There's nothing you can earn. There's nothing you can buy. There's nothing you can do to bring something to the table for him to make peace with you. You simply accept it. Because Jesus says, listen, I have made peace with God on your behalf. I have taken the wrath, the punishment of your sin on behalf of you. I've made peace with God. And we accept it by faith. Paul writes in Romans chapter 5, verse 1, therefore, since we were made right in God's sight by faith, we have peace with God because of what Jesus Christ our Lord has done for us. And what is it that Jesus Christ did on behalf of us? I love going back into the Old Testament and seeing one of the over 300 different prophecies that prop up an understanding, a belief, a faith in Jesus Christ, because we see prophecy after prophecy after prophecy fulfilled in perfect harmony. In Isaiah chapter 53, verse 5, he writes, But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Paul writes to the church at Colossae in Colossians chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. For God was pleased to have his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Our sin was upon Christ as he paid the penalty for our sin on the cross. God's wrath was completely satisfied by what Christ did on our behalf. And we recognize Jesus was the only one that could bridge that need, could bridge that brokenness, could bridge our sin to the Father. And we recognize that he is the only one that bridges it by him saying so clearly, a verse I say frequently, no man comes to the Father but through me. And because Jesus is the only one that can provide forgiveness for our sins, he's the only one that can provide peace with God. He's it. There's a beautiful picture of this in Luke chapter 7, where we see a woman who doesn't just have a closet with a skeleton in it. She has a lot of closets that are full of skeletons. And her reputation has been completely ruined. Everywhere she goes within her town, within her city, her reputation follows her. She is shunned in the community. She's a blight on her surroundings. But she hears Jesus teach, and something in her changes. The words of Jesus penetrate her heart. And there's a shift that takes place that causes this woman to recognize the teaching she has just heard demand worship on her part. And she finds that Jesus is having a meal in one of the religious leaders' home named Simon. And knowing her reputation follows her, knowing that her story is front and center, she finds her way into this home where Jesus is sitting at a table with all of these religious leaders, these holier than thous. And she finds her way to the feet of Jesus. And she kneels down on her knees, on her hands, and she begins to cry over the feet of Jesus. And her tears begin to splash on the feet of Jesus. And she takes this more than likely clay jar full of nard, or we would understand it as perfume. She begins to pour this perfume out on the feet of Jesus, and her tears and the perfume and the fragrance begins to be intermingled in this beautiful moment of a woman worshiping at the feet of Jesus. And what's the consequence? Religious people getting really angry. Those that think they understand worship. Those that think their life is, well, one to be worshiped. They wouldn't say that. But those that were supposedly have it all together get the most angry in this moment. And so Jesus has two responses. He gives a response to Simon in his anger and a response to the woman in her worship. And what does he say to Simon? In Luke chapter 7, verse 47, it says, "Therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven." And then what does he say to her? Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. And Jesus in this moment makes a direct correlation between salvation and peace. And he brings these two into harmony with one another. And she was saved from what? Her sin. And now, because her sin had been addressed, she has peace with God, who came to be a bridge to salvation and peace. Who? Jesus. And maybe you're here today and you're saying, nice story, PK, but my story, a wreck. My story and my decision have left a wake of broken and bloodied bodies. Like, my story has been devastating. There's no possible way that God in this story of forgiveness that you're talking about could ever possibly forgive me. The problem with that thinking is you're wrong. I can take you into Scripture and show you page after page, story after story of people that thought exactly what you think, and demonstrate, show you a God that proved each and every one of them wrong. And he doesn't just forgive their story, he uses their story. And I want you to realize that this spiritual peace we can have with God, it's possible. It's possible not just to experience a peace with God, but a second kind of peace. Number two, a personal peace within ourselves. The psalmist writes a passage that maybe you hear at a funeral, or you see on a business calendar on your desk. It's a passage that I believe it paints a vivid picture of what peace could look like in your soul and in mine. And in Psalm chapter 23, it says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil." Why? For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now hear me. I believe it's completely possible for you and I to live with eternal peace of God. Hear me. You and I can have an eternal peace with God, and yet not have an internal peace of God. We can have an eternal peace with God and lack an internal peace of God. Right? Even the most upright can be uptight if our focus isn't right. That'll tweet. Or do we say that'll X? I don't know anymore. Even the uptight can be not right when our focus is off. I read about a guy's testimony where he talks about moments with his therapist. And in dealing with his anxiety and his worry, he wrote about the counsel of a therapist that said, one of the ways to address your anxiety is to finish what you start. And so what did he do? He said, today I have finished 2 bags of chip and an entire chocolate cake. And if only chocolate pie could bring peace, I'd be Yoda. I'm just telling you, if that could honestly bring peace for me, I am, but hear me, the only thing that adds to me is a bigger waistline. That's not what's going to bring peace in our world. See in Numbers chapter 6, verse 24 through 26, it's a passage we've used in churches, we've given as a blessing to people that says, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you what? Peace. What does it start out by saying? The Lord bless you and keep you. Now understand, in the way in which you and I read this in our English, there is so much lost from the Hebrew and the Greek. See, the word bless in the Hebrew gives the visual imagery, gives the understanding to its reader that the word bless means to stoop down. And the idea of a God in the grandeur, in the majestic nature and likeness of who he is, for a God like that to stoop down in order to bless you gives the inclination that in his stooping down, he is looking at you, he is gazing upon you, looking to give you his full attention, to give you a full expression of his mercy and his grace, for his eyes to gaze into yours, for you to realize this is who gives peace. I don't know about you, but if the thought of our Creator King stooping down into the midst of my pain, in the midst of my worry, in the midst of my stress, could you imagine for a moment him taking your face and altering it into his direction, into his eyes, and looking at you saying, I've come to bless you? If that doesn't settle something in your spirit, if that doesn't somehow produce in you a release of anxiety for you to recognize you're in good hands. Like, just let me tell you, there's no insurance company that has you in better hands than the King does. And if that doesn't settle something for you, let me just be bold in saying, maybe, just maybe, you've not really met him. But he says, in my goodness and my grace, I've come to bless you, to keep you, for my face to shine upon you, to be gracious to you. And it says, may the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. He is not distracted by you. He is not bored with you. That idea should give you a greater sense of peace. And now understand, when you read that passage, and I believe a number of other passages, what's happening here? There is no mention of God in his grandeur, in his blessing of you, removes any problem. Look at it closely. Like he's saying, listen, I am going to demonstrate as I bless you in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your problem. Removing those things are not what bring you peace. We understand in Scripture our pain, our trouble, our toil, this stress will remain. But what did he say? I will multiply my peace in the midst of it. And if you somehow think, or you've heard someone teach, that in a relationship with Jesus, somehow this perfect fairy dust is going to just simply fall over your life and everything's going to just feel right. Here's the problem. Come to know Jesus Christ and this world will crush you. Step into a faith in his grace, his mercy, and his salvation, and your world will start falling apart because this world does not understand that. And he says in the midst of that, when those around you reject you, when those bring you pain, when the heartache of life sets in, I will multiply my peace. Not remove the problem, I'll multiply my peace. He's saying, listen, you can still have personal peace even in the presence of problems. I think it's why Paul captures this so well in Philippians chapter 4. And what does he say? Be anxious for nothing, but in everything through prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, bring your request to God. Why? He goes on to say, because the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts, what? Your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Do you remember the first recorded words of Jesus to his disciples after his death, there before his resurrection. Do you remember what he says to them? They're in John chapter 20, and it's a great chapter. In verses 19 through 21, it says, on the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together with doors locked for fear of the Jews. In other words, there's some stress. Jesus came and stood among them, and he said, peace be with you. And he said this, he showed them his hands inside. And the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. And again, Jesus says, peace be with you. In the moment of their greatest pain, in the moment of their greatest stress, Jesus gives them what they need most, and it was peace. And because of his cross, you can know peace with God. And because of his presence, they had the peace of God. And let me tell you something, he's still offering that today. But I believe there's a third piece that he gives us, that number 3, relational peace with others. Relational peace with others. Let me just ask, anybody here have anyone in your life that's difficult to get along with? Like, okay, some of you raised your hand a little too vigorously there. Like some of you right now, the reason you think about Christmas, and you're like, Korey, is this a Christmas message or what? Like the reason some of you, during a holiday moment, during Thanksgiving, during Christmas, the reason some of you stress the most is because you are not at peace with the people you will celebrate these seasons with. Like the people in your life that are so stressful that you yourself, well, you can't sing songs like peace on earth, goodwill toward men, because you don't have any. And if today you're like, Korey, my family's great. Like, I think everybody really gets along and everybody it's a really great time. You might be the one they're talking about. I read a moment of a police cadet that was taking his final exam to become an officer. And one of the questions were, what would you do if you received a call and you had to go arrest your mom? And he simply said, call for backup. If you and I have people in our life that in order to deal with them, we need to call backup, well, I have some things to share with you. With some people, peace seems impossible. That's why I love Scripture, when it says all things are possible with God. In Proverbs chapter 16, verse 7, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Let me read that again for those of you that turned me off. When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Listen, as you and I work to be in right relationship with the Father, he is at work to help you and I be at peace with others. To be in right relationship with him. You say, well, PK, you don't know how difficult they are. Like, you don't get it. Yeah, of a church of more than 600, I couldn't possibly understand. Like each and every week, standing on a platform and giving a message that some may like, some may not. Just understand, I couldn't possibly understand what it means to work with difficult people. Folks, let me tell you, sheep bite. And even in the midst of working with people and understanding the messy that comes along with it, I recognize that even though I may be in a position where some may or may not like who I am or what I do or how I do it, there is a difference for me to be at peace with people or to have difficulty with people with a lack of peace because of my position. But I should never be at odds with people because of my disposition. See, your position in Christ is going to create conflict with those outside of Christ. But that position on the truth of God's word should not be what brings that will bring division. But my disposition, meaning my ability to show grace, my ability to show mercy, my ability to extend forgiveness, should never be what creates division. See, in Matthew 5:9, it says, God blesses those who work for peace, for they will be called children of God. You and I are called to be more than peacekeepers. We're called to be peacemakers. We are to work for peace. In Romans 12:18, Paul writes, if it's possible, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. What? As much as it depends on you. He's saying, do your part. Do all you can do. And even though that position causes division, don't let it be over your disposition. A couple of weeks ago, we took communion together. And I shared this, I'll share it again, and it's the first recorded words we get in the New Testament of Jesus in his life. And it's when Joseph and Mary have gone back to the town where they feel like they have forgotten him. And I think that's an amazing story. Like they're traveling, they've made it quite a distance, and Joseph and Mary find each other and like, hey, where's Jesus? I don't know, I thought you had him. No, I thought you had him. And like you had one job, to raise the Messiah. Like we've lost the Son of God. Like the stress in this moment, like we have lost the one that we're supposed to have peace with, and he's gone. And they travel back and they find him in the temple, and they're like, young man, where have you been? And the first recorded words of Jesus, did you not know I was about my Father's business? And yet the last recorded words we have of him, there on the cross, those words were, it is finished. What was finished? The work that Jesus came to do to bridge the gap of your sin and my sin in order for us to be at peace with the Father, so that you and I could understand what it means to be at peace with others as we experience peace within ourselves. An eternal peace with God, a present peace within ourselves, and an understanding we're at peace with one another. And this Christmas, you and I can live in that. And because of his presence, you and I recognize we walk into some difficult moments knowing he's still good. He still desires to stoop down and gaze into my story, into my life, and say, I still desire to bless you. I desire to keep you. I desire that my face shines on you. And this Christmas, his presence is greatly greater than any gift you will find under a tree. And some of you desperately need this. Some of you are struggling in the very soul that you capture within your body. You are wrestling with this stress and this worry. And he said, listen, as I gaze on you, will you look at me? Will you stop all of the stuff, this whirlwind? Will you just settle into a moment and know I'm with you? I love you. And this morning, if you've never understood the gaze of God the Father, if you've never understood what it means for Jesus to take on the penalty of your sin and bridge the gap of your sin and his forgiveness and bring salvation into your story, I've been saying it for 3 weeks, this could be the greatest Christmas of your lifetime. And this morning, you could understand what it means to know him personally and be introduced to this peace that's an everlasting peace. A peace that moves beyond your understanding and mine. And this morning, I'm going to invite you, if you would, to stand to your feet as our prayer partners step out. And as they begin to make their way forward this morning, I'm going to just invite you right now, right there where you are, to just simply bow your heads. And right now, all around this room, I recognize there are people that are saying, PK, I am struggling. I've got no joy. And I realize when I have no joy, there's no peace. And this morning, if you need someone to just simply come alongside of you and pray over you this morning, we want you to know that this moment's more important than some flapjacks waiting for you. This moment's more important than the idea you still have Christmas shopping. This idea is more important than the roast you've got at home going. This moment right now, realize there are people all around you that are struggling. And today, maybe you just need to be reminded one more time of what it means for His face to shine upon you. If you need prayer this morning, I'm going to invite you to stand out. And if today you need to know who Jesus Christ is personally, if you need to see your sin bridged with His forgiveness for you to understand salvation, all you have to do is step out in this moment, find one of our prayer partners, and just say, can you tell me about Jesus? And that answer is a resounding yes. It's a resounding yes. Father, today, would you have your way? Father, would you speak peace into our life? In the midst of this season, in the midst of this time that we celebrate Emmanuel, God with us. And Father, would that rest on us in such a sincere and deep way that, Lord, we would never be mistaken of who does the blessing and what the blessing looks like in our life.